People are asking, can Congress override this? Can Biden override this? Can the Pentagon override this? Can DAs just ignore it? Can the FDA override it? Because all of those claims were made this week by various Democratic politicians. The same people who said insurrection is scary, 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 were all calling for it this week.
Calling for it meaningfully, saying, screw the Supreme Court, we're going to defy the court order. The Justice Department saying, we're not going to abide by the Second Amendment ruling either. We're going to save lives. We don't have to listen to one branch of government. I don't know if this was it. When you get to Roe, ask Barnes if SCOTUS addressed abortion in the context of Ninth Amendment. We did that, and how that will affect some states' laws going forward.
This will have no impact on any other law. Thomas mentioned that he would like the court to reconsider whether the 14th Amendment should be the basis of all of these rules instead of the Privileges and Immunities Clause in the Ninth Amendment. People interpreted that to mean Thomas is going to overturn every privacy ruling in history. That's not what he meant. He believes many of those can be rooted in the Ninth Amendment or the Privileges and Immunities Clause. He's never doing this through the Liberty Clause of the 14th Amendment. He always thought that was a mistake. And there's good arguments for that. I don't fully embrace that argument of Thomas, but that's where that is. But there's been a lot of deliberate misinformation out there about what this case means. Now, going to the so-called solutions, Biden does not have the power to override this. The State Department doesn't have the power to override this. The Pentagon, for the most part, I'll get to where the Pentagon has a little bit of a weasel way out, mostly can't override this. Local DAs, again, there's some limitations to what they can do. And the Justice Department, Merrick Garland, claimed the FDA can override this because over half of abortions today in America are done by pill, done medicinally. And he claims, well, the FDA has approved the pill, so that means no state can ban the pill, which is not at all what the FDA law allows, and reveals how abusive allowing any claim or pretense to that power. But Congress doesn't have that power. And this was, here's where the left screwed themselves. When the Congress passed the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act, they applied it to state governments. The left was enraged at this because it reinstated a robust definition of the First Amendment. They took it up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court said Congress doesn't have the power to determine what is and isn't a constitutional right. They can't overturn our precedents that way. They can create other rights, they can establish other remedies, but they don't have a right to get into governing religious affairs of local governments. So yes, the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act can apply to the federal government, but it cannot constitutionally apply to the state government. Commerce Clause ain't that broad. So you extend that to abortion, Congress can't legislate Roe. They have no power to legislate Roe. They can legislate whether it happens on Army facilities. They can legislate whether they spend money for it, things of that nature, but they can't force a national abortion law in the country. They don't have that authority. Biden doesn't have that authority through the executive branch. The Pentagon, the FDA doesn't have that authority. The FDA has the authority to say whether you can label a drug between states. It has no control over the practice of medicine. Indeed, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act specifically states it cannot be interpreted to impose any obligation on the practice of medicine. That's why doctors are currently suing them for how they tried to screw around with ivermectin. They can't determine those things. So the FDA's approval of the labeling of an abortion pill cannot override a state's law prohibiting those abortions. And what the Attorney General did was call for legal nullification of a Supreme Court decision. Basically, take every accusation that has been made against Trump when he was president. It was all confession through projection. Family members making corrupt deals to steal elections through overseas countries' involvements in a country that speaks Russian. That was Joe Biden. And here we have presidents who disregard the law, disregard the rule of law, disregard the Supreme Court, disregard the Constitution, think they're above it. That's Joe Biden and the Democrats. But none of these remedies that Democrats are laying out are remedies. Their only remedy is to win at the legislative level and to convince people that their desire to have more babies killed is popular. Political reality is there's polls that will say, do you approve of overturning Roe? Most people think that just means, do you approve of banning abortion in all cases? That will get you 2/3 support. When you break it down and you ask people, aside from breaking down who actually votes on it, overwhelmingly a pro-life group. But putting that aside, you ask them, do you support abortion after the baby has a heartbeat? Do you support abortion when the baby can feel pain? Do you support abortion when you can see the baby on an ultrasound? Do you support abortion when there's brain activity taking place? Overwhelmingly, Americans say no, 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 and no. And here's the other reality. Most of the world bans abortion after 12 weeks. We're there with like North Korea and China at some of our crazy rules. So over half of abortions happen in less than 10 weeks. So the idea that, so in reality, the majority position will be that these rare, dangerous, frightening, gruesome baby killing tactics will be over, like they should be in much of the country. Now, if you still want it, California, Illinois, Northeast, it's still going to be illegal in those places, probably for as long as it is now or even longer. But the net effect of the decision is it's now back to the states. The federal government can't overturn it, override it. Now, what the Army can do is they can set up abortion on Army bases. What they can't do is recruit people from off the Army base to use it. This goes back to the military having exclusive jurisdiction on Army bases. The state government has no power over an Army base. It's always been problems with that. There's comparable issues with tribal reservations, but tribes, in my view, have a better argument for that. But it appears so to the degree that what the Pentagon is saying is that they're going to allow abortion to occur on a military base, regardless of the local state law that military base is within, they may be within their legal rights, depending on the circumstances. But what they can't do is completely ignore it. And a military member can't go off base and get an abortion and avoid criminal prosecution. So that's basically where it's heading coming forward.
Now, this is one of the things that people have been talking about. Clarence Thomas talking about prohibiting contraception. Now, is that a play on words here, and that the contraception?
He didn't say that at all. All he said was that all of those rights should never have been within the definition of liberty under the 14th Amendment. They should be within the Privileges and Immunities Clause, and we should make that clear going forward because that's a more manageable process. He did not say that the Privileges and Immunities Clause would not protect birth control, protect interracial marriage, protect any of these other things. So people misunderstood what he was saying in that context. Now, based on his prior rulings, it's likely that he would not extend it to same-sex marriage. He would likely say that is not within the Privileges and Immunities Clause because he also didn't see it within the liberty provision of the 14th Amendment either. But people misconstrued, the media deliberately misportrayed what he was saying to make it sound like all privacy was gone. This case has, as the Supreme Court said about a dozen times, has no impact on any other privacy right.
Okay. Something that people are freaking out about, another aspect of misinformation, fear-mongering, panic, that one state can make it illegal to travel to another state to have an abortion. Now I'm thinking, Robert, I mean, there's federal murder statutes, then there's state murder statutes. Why could not one state consider it to be murder committed in another state based on their own state laws as relates to murder, and then apply it to anybody who goes out of state to get it in California?
For the same reason that none of the state's laws apply to conduct in another state. It's the limits of territorial jurisdiction, number one. The state's power is limited to its power over the land that it has the right to govern. And then second, the Constitution has an interstate right of travel that has been interpreted to say you can't use, one state cannot impose its rules on another state. This most often gets litigated actually in land disputes and tax disputes. So that often, like the state of California lost a big suit, had to write a bunch of checks to a bunch of other states because they tried to impose their taxing power on citizens of other states or activity that took place in other states. So that's the territorial limit is pretty strict in the context of the state. That's why you don't see like Illinois can't prosecute a murder in Nebraska. Same principle. Now, the federal government could probably pass a law protecting the right to travel between states for an abortion to the degree they thought that was necessary. On the grounds that it's an interstate activity, particularly that it's interstate commerce. Calling abortion interstate commerce is kind of interesting, but put that aside, that would be the pretext by which they could govern it. Now, they could include the abortion pill within the Controlled Substances Act And that would re-trigger that old debate, whether or not under interstate commerce they could regulate the abortion pill as interstate commerce and thereby preempt various state and local laws governing the administration of that pill. That's why some of us said drug law is a bad idea, because they're always going to encroach on constitutional liberties of the individual at the local and the local governmental participatory power of the individual through that government, which is precisely what's happened in the Controlled Substances Act context on multiple occasions. Hence, for example, someone who was growing marijuana for their own purposes for medicinal reasons, who was not even in interstate commerce, could be banned by the Controlled Substances Act from doing that, because marijuana as a whole had an interstate commerce component to it, and even interstate activity could impact it. And that was the Supreme Court's excuse. Thomas, I think, dissented from that case, but Scalia was in the majority. Another case where some of these great conservatives managed to drift away from the Constitution when they didn't like the political consequences of the case, sadly. So that would be the only way they could do it. They could put the abortion pill within the Controlled Substances Act and try to use that. Though, again, the point of Controlled Substances Act is to restrict drugs, not to guarantee or expand their supply. So that's, and then you have, it's not within they could amend the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act to try to actually make the FDA the governing medical authority forever, but that's going to have major constitutional fights across the board. So they could, but all of them would be legally risky and unconstitutionally questionable territory that might require the court to re-examine some of its prior assumptions in these old cases